Hi, welcome to my video on how to sew a fitted fabric mask. I'm Mandy Smith, let's get started. This mask fits very nicely underneath your glasses and the nose piece pinches down so you don't fog up while you're working. I am not a professional video maker, and making a video and sewing with one hand is super hard, but done is beautiful. Here are the supplies we're going to use to make the mask. We have 2 7x12 pieces of cotton, 1 7x12 piece of Pellon 808 fusible interfacing, 2 12x14 inch pieces of cording or elastic, depending on the size of your personal mask. If you're giving it away, I would err on the side of caution and make them 14 inches. They can always be knotted down smaller. 1 piece of 9.5 inch pipe cleaner, a pair of pinking shears, good scissors, and sew all thread. So you're going to want to fuse one of your cotton rectangles to your Pellon 808. It's hard to see in this video, but there's a dull side and a shinier side with the adhesive on it. So lining them up really close and being careful not to get it to the edge of your iron if you've got a little peeking out. You're just going to use a hot, dry iron. So getting ready to cut out our pattern pieces, I have my plain cotton fabric on the bottom. I've got my fused cotton fabric layered on top of that, lined up exactly. And I've got my template piece, so we'll be cutting 2 each of the cotton and 2 of the fused cotton. You can lay your pieces down closer to this edge and trace them with a pencil if you want, or you can just use a rotary cutter if you don't want to trace to go ahead and cut that out. The smaller rotary cutter blades make it easier to get into a curve this way. A little bit easier than using the big guy, but it can be done. You're going to want to take this piece and flip it or mirror it towards each other, and that is really important because you can see you need one of the right sides of each of this together. So this is what you do not want to do. It's very important that these pieces face one another. So now we're ready to assemble the inner and outer parts of the mask. So I have my plain cotton layered together, right sides together. I've got my fused cottons layered right sides together, and I'm just going to sew this curve that goes along the nose and the mouth part of the mask. It's a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and there's no need to backstitch because it's going to be also taken up in this back seam here. It's kind of hard to hold the phone and sew at the same time one-handed, but here we go. So as I'm doing our curve, what I care about is where my needle lands in position to the outer edge of my presser foot. If I can consistently keep the distance the same from this point where my needle lands to the very edge of the foot in this area, I'm going to have a really even seam allowance going all the way down. Curves can be somewhat challenging for people, and I learned from a video that if you use your guiding hand and you rotate your hand as the fabric is coming through the machine, that really helps you to get a nice curve. So again, hard to hold it one-handed, but here we go. And I'm just rotating my hand to twist the fabric as it's going through the presser foot. So I've assembled my mask front and back, or inside and outside, and I have trimmed along the seam edge with the pinking shears. So we're going to but not through. We don't want to clip our stitches. And then we're going to give it a good press to set the seams. And now I'm going to open up the masks and we're going to press the seam to one side. And like we would do in quilting, we're going to try to nest the seams. So paying attention to which direction we're pressing them in and out. So again, I can't do this one-handed, but you'll get the idea. If I open up this mask and I press this seam away kind of gently in here, then this outer seam is going to lay in one direction. So I come in and with the tip of my iron, I gently push against the seam, just a little bit, you don't have to go very far. So I've turned my mask right side out and you can see that that did press this inner seam to one side. This is important to keep the bulk down in the seams of the mask. So as in quilting, when we're nesting a seam, we're going to look down this way. This seam is going this direction. So if we have the right side of the mask facing us, which it will be when it's assembled, we can look down the edge of this and we want this to press to the right. This is what I was talking about, nesting the seams. If I turn this, you can see this is the exterior of the mask facing out and the interior facing in. So I've pressed the stiffer seam to the left here, the softer seam to the right, and I would nest these two together so they're going in opposite directions. And this is important because later we are going to be top stitching down the spine of this seam to give it a little bit more structure, and it just reduces the bulk in that seam. If they were both going the same direction, it would be really fat on one side and harder for the machine to sew through. So I've got my pieces right sides together and I'm just clipping or pinning them in place, making sure that my seams are nested here. And then we are going to stitch through, starting at this edge, but leaving this end and this end open. We're going to stitch along the top using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we're going to go across the top, and we're going to come in and go across the bottom. So I've got the mask sewn top and bottom, and we are ready to now put in the pipe cleaner. So I'm going to cut some notches around this curve. I'm going to do 3, 1, 2, 3 evenly spaced notches along this edge because we need a spot for the pipe cleaner to be sewn into the seam allowance. I'm also going to come in with my scissors, and to keep the bulk down in the seams, I'm going to clip 2 but not through on either side of here. I'm actually going to remove that little center section. I'm going to come in here and cut a little box out of that. It just makes it a lot less bulky at the nose piece point. Here's what that looks like when it's done. So I've removed the notch out of the bulky part of the seam, and I've clipped a couple of somewhat evenly spaced notches here. And so what we're doing is we're creating a little tab for the pipe cleaner to rest on and be stitched to. Got my 9.5 inch pipe cleaner, and I've simply folded it in half, and now I'm going to twist it all the way down securely on itself. I folded my pipe cleaner in half to find the center point, and I've aligned it with the very tip of the nose piece point. I'm going to lay it into the seam allowance here over this little tabbed area, and I'm going to adjust a zigzag seam so that I'm going to catch right inside of this line and somewhere out here. Now it doesn't matter completely. If you go off of that, it's fine because it's going to catch along here and it will, in a sense, encase this. So I'm lined up just inside of the seam line here, or on the outside I should say, and I'm going to be very careful that my zigzag stitch is wide enough that it is not going to hit the pipe cleaner. So as I start sewing, it's going to just go right across that. So probably that's plenty. And now I'm going to lift my presser foot. I don't need to sew along this whole area. I'm just going to go down and go across each tabbed area. This is what it looks like when you've got the pipe cleaner attached. So you can see I've just hit a couple stitches here. I don't clip my stitches, I just move down and keep on stitching. So the reason it's important to only sew that into the seam allowance up here is because if you stitch inside of this seam line, when we turn that, it's not going to turn right side out. So I've taken my pinking shears and I've trimmed to but not through both top and bottom edges all the way up to the pipe cleaner, and that's going to reduce the bulk in the seams when we turn it right side out and then top stitch along this edge. And this is important too, that you use the 3/8 seam allowance, because when we do turn this out and we go to top stitch, we need to have enough room that we're not going to hit the pipe cleaner with our needle. I've turned my mask right side out, and I just go along with my fingers and kind of roll the edges before I press it to make sure that there's nothing left in there, and especially over the pipe cleaner section. It's sewn into the seam allowance inside, so it's got a little space, so you just want to roll that fabric to make sure that you're spreading it all the way apart, and then we'll take it to the iron and give it a good press all the way around. So we've got our mask turned right side out, and we're going to go along each opened end and stitch it closed. And I'm going to do that with my needle in my far right position. Going to give it a little bit of space here, because when I'm done doing that, I'm going to trim it with the pinking shears, and we need just enough to go to but not through our stitches. And there we go. And this is the portion of the mask that's going to be folded back on itself and top stitched closed to make a casing for the ear loops. So we're ready to top stitch. So using the 3/8 seam allowance, we're going to sew along the top and bottom of the mask, and we're going to be very careful that we go on the outside edge of the pipe cleaner. We don't want to hit that with our needle because it would probably break. That's bad. We're going to come all the way around into the edge. So what I like to do is, it's a little bulky under here for your presser foot. So as you can feel the pipe cleaner coming, you might just stop here and raise your foot up and then set it back down on top of it, and then just give your machine a little extra help guiding it through the curves. So I've top stitched around my mask, top and bottom, and now it's time to turn the sides over to make the casing. So I'm doing an approximate 1/2 inch, and whoops, we just need to be careful using the safety pin to attach the cording to, and having to put it through the casing, that you make sure that your casing is big enough for that to slide through there. So that feels pretty safe. And if you wonder, just check it out. You can feel it with your fingers right there. So I will fold this over, I'll give it a good press with my iron, and then I'm going to come back here, and from edge to edge I'm just going to go over that first line of stitching that we made previously. We're all stitched up. So now we are going to take our safety pin, and I was using this rat tail cording. It's soft and it doesn't irritate the back of my ears. If you can get your hands on some elastic, that's also great to use, but as far as I know, most places are sold out, so this is kind of a good second. So I just go right through the cording, then we're going to go through the casing and just knot it up. And when we're done, it's going to look like this. So there we go. When you put your mask on, you just want to give it a good pinch at the nose piece, and you can form this to your cheeks so you don't have a gap. And I have heard that to sterilize the masks, if you're worried about washing them and having the pipe cleaner get corroded, I read on the internet that you can sterilize them by using a steam iron and giving them a good burst of steam. Steam actually gets hotter than your wash machine would. So there you go, friends. That's our comfy, all-day rigid face mask. I hope you guys stay safe and healthy, and God bless you. Bye.